You see the headlines all the time. Violence in Canada. It's a really tough subject, and honestly, it often leaves us with more questions than answers. So in this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers and look at what the research actually says are the true, interconnected roots of this problem. Let's dive in. So, let's just start with the biggest question of all. What's really behind it? What truly causes violence? You know, it's so easy to look for a simple answer, right? To point the finger at one specific thing or one group of people. But the reality is, it's just not that simple. It's way more complex and, frankly, way more revealing.
And that right there is the most important point of this whole analysis. When it comes to violence, it is never, ever just one thing. Think of it like a giant, tangled web of factors, all connected to each other. And understanding that, well, that's the first real step to understanding the problem itself. All right, so to start untangling this web, we have to go back, way back. The first layer we need to look at is historical and structural, these deep echoes from the past that are still shaping our present in some really profound ways.
A really key concept here is something called intergenerational trauma. Now, this isn't just about things that happened a long time ago. It's about how these specific, horrifying trauma from policies like the residential school system literally gets passed down through families, from one generation to the next. And that creates these very real modern-day cycles of pain and vulnerability. And this quote it gets right to the heart of it. When we see some communities facing huge challenges like higher rates of addiction or mental health struggles, it is a huge mistake to see those as some kind of cultural trait. The evidence is crystal clear. They are the direct consequences of government policies and historical harm that has never been truly resolved. That distinction is everything. But of course, historical trauma isn't the only piece of the puzzle. Layered right on top of that are the incredible pressures of just trying to live in the modern world. All the economic and social stresses that affect millions of Canadians every single day.
And here's where we see a major tension. On the one hand, Canada has a reputation for strong social safety nets. But on the other hand, the day-to-day reality for so many people, especially in our biggest cities, is just this constant growing economic strain. The cost of living, the fight to find stable work, it all creates this intense, high-pressure environment.
And those pressures show up in very real ways. It's that constant financial stress, the crushing weight of trying to afford a place to live, the insecurity of not knowing if you'll have a job next month. Then, you add in a sense of being isolated in a big city, maybe far away from your family and support systems, and you can see how that becomes a perfect breeding ground for frustration and conflict.
Okay, so we've got these huge historical and economic forces. But how does all that actually turn into violence on a human level? Let's zoom right in now to the individual and interpersonal factors to see how these big pressures play out in people's actual lives. When you look at the most common personal triggers, the picture becomes really clear. Mental health struggles make up 35%, and substance abuse is another 30%. Do the math. That's almost 2/3 of these incidents linked directly to health issues where getting treatment can be incredibly difficult. When people can't get the help they need, the risks just pile up. That's not a personal failing, it's a symptom of a system that's under serious strain. And this leads us to a really tough fact, one that's often overlooked. The rate of intimate partner violence here in Canada is just shockingly high. This is the kind of violence that's happening behind closed doors, and it's driven by a very specific and incredibly damaging set of social dynamics.
A lot of the time, the triggers come back to damaging ideas about gender and power. These harmful patriarchal attitudes, this idea that men are supposed to be in control, can combine with all that economic stress we just talked about, and it creates an absolutely explosive mix. And that same root of prejudice is what fuels so much of the hate-motivated violence we see against LGBTQ+ people.
All right, on to our final layer. On top of all these root causes, you have what we can call accelerants and system gaps. Now, these are things that don't cause violence on their own, but think of them like pouring gasoline on a fire. When tensions are already high, they can make things so much worse and so much more deadly. So here are 3 of the big ones. First, the availability of illegal weapons, a lot of them coming in from smuggling networks. Second, the influence of organized crime, gangs, drug trafficking, which just fuels more violence. And the third one is a bit more subtle. It's the way our culture sometimes normalizes aggression and presents being dominant as the best way to solve your problems. And this cycle, this shows exactly how gaps in our systems create this terrible feedback loop.
So a conflict happens, but the services that are supposed to respond are underfunded, so the response is weak. Without real rehabilitation, the root causes are never dealt with. And what's the result? The conflict happens again, and it often gets worse. Our system is basically designed to just manage crises, not actually prevent them.
So after looking at all these different layers, from history to the individual to the system itself, we can finally step back and see the whole thing. We can see that complete tangled web.
So let's bring it all home. The roots of violence aren't simple at all. They're this combination of everything we've just talked about. Historical injustices that create deep trauma, modern economic pressures that create unbearable stress, untreated mental health and substance abuse issues, destructive power dynamics, criminal networks, and all of it is made so much worse by the gaps in our own social support systems.
So if you take one thing away from this, let it be this. No single community or culture is just inherently violent. The causes are systemic. They are human, they're driven by stress, by inequality, by unresolved trauma, and by the breakdown of the very social supports that are supposed to hold us all together.
And that leaves us with one last massive question to think about. If the roots of violence are this deep, this complex, and this interconnected, where in the world do we even begin to create real, lasting change?